in my opinion, the process is not right. It's not fair. It's also from a psychology perspective, the interview process is fundamentally flawed,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
which is why the whole ghosting element that people talk about, I understand it more and more because it ties in very closely with the world of dating,
Hmm.
online dating, modern dating. That's where this sort of ghosting nonsense comes from, really.
You are listening to Frog Talk, presented by Black Ribbon.
In last week's episode, we discussed how culture in the workplace has broken over the last few years, and especially in a post-COVID environment. We ended our conversation by highlighting this notion that while COVID resulted in a much needed global emphasis on self-care, it was pushed in particular in the West to an extreme where it became what I call selfish care. So in that narrative, it became all about the individual in the workplace. It became about me, me, me. If you don't meet my needs, I'm going to leave. If you don't, if I don't get certain requests or demands met, then I'm going to quit or whatever, to the point where people are straight up ghosting interviewers right now. And left the company, colleagues, and everyone else sort of hanging. You all have experience both working for companies and clients, and also leading your own teams. What is your experience with this concept? Do you believe it's true? Have you experienced this firsthand? How do you think companies can sort of rally around a shared purpose to bring the narrative back to collective perspective?
Well, I think first of all, it's not just from an employee, it's an employer as well. And that's what I've been noticing as of late. So to say it's solely employee or a potential employee, I think would be a little misguided.
Yeah, and I agree to add to what Chris mentioned is that, leadership plays a big role in employees wanting to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And so I think that in order for there to be that effort where employees want to work for a company or employees that are at that organization, leadership plays a big role. And it's a matter of really helping everyone to be part of something bigger, which really impacts the morale and overall satisfaction of an employee within an organization. And even things like Glassdoor can demonstrate some of those things, either positively or negatively, for those employees that are looking for organizations to join.
I agree. And that's not to say, because actually, Nadera, you brought this to my attention. Just the percentages of the younger generations that have been, say, quote, ghosting, um, and it's shocking to me. um, but again, also, I don't want to play one side too heavily because, I've been experiencing this myself when you're talking with a potential employer and or even to say recruiter, and you set expectations, you try to set expectations, and then those expectations are met. You're ghosted. So, but on the flip side, when I do read and hear about stories where, say, candidate goes through the process of the hiring process and signs the contract and then doesn't show up.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you say when you want to sort of apply the selfish care, as it were, to both sides, on the employer side, what experiences have you had on that end, Chris, specifically? So is it, for example, when we say like even potential applicants are ghosting employers, would you say employers are also ghosting applicants, for example? Is it a one-to-one, or
Yes.
is there something specific that you were sort of thinking about?
And I should also preface this by saying there's always going to be nuance and there's always going to be exceptions. So, I'm not just, and this is kind of general and based on my experience. Um, so I'll use this. This has happened a few times. I'll be contacted for an opportunity and they'll say, okay, we'd like to move forward in the process with the interview. You should hear something. Well, I'll say, when can I hear something? I'd like to keep my calendar up to date, keep my ducks in a row. 24 hours. Okay, good expectations. 24 hours goes by. Okay, we all get busy. I understand. Not a problem. 48 hours goes by. Okay, I'll send a follow up. Hey, just wanted to follow up, see what's happening. I was told this. Still nothing. Follow up again. Hey, I'm just gonna take this as, you don't want to work together, and that's fine. That's totally fine. And then they'll get back. And then you're like, okay, get you back on the hook. And then nothing. So that's one example. And which I find completely unacceptable. And I guess to broaden the conversation, I've talked with this with friends and peers. And one thing that I hear that is kind of common is, well, the job market is a lot different than it was 5 years ago. And I think to myself, when I say this too, and I say, well, the job market was different 5 years prior to that, and it's going to be different 5 years from now. That's just, it's going to. But has ghosting ever been acceptable? Let's be real, right? At least that's my opinion. So I have not heard of anyone that I know of that has ghosted a potential opportunity or has gone so far as to sign a contract. So I'd be very interested to hear what others have to say about that.
Once. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And actually, I wanted to, I think
Me?
there's definitely a place where there is a back and forth. There's a reciprocity of sort of reacting to reactions and reacting to actions, in the sense that employers and leaders are not leading in the sense that they are acting in the way that they want to be acted towards. So in the sense that, if you don't want applicants to, for example, ghost you and actually show up and show some sort of respect or loyalty right off the bat, to the point Veronica was making in the beginning, there needs to be an example set from the get-go, right? You need to sort of set the stage from the beginning as an employer as well, to create an environment and an atmosphere of back and forth and immediate collaboration, so as to give someone a reason to even care to follow through. So I think that's a good point. Zishan, do you have anything to add to that from your own experiences that you might have had in the last few years?
Specifically within this environment, I actually have no experience, ironically. I haven't had to recruit anyone for the better part of 9 years. It's the last time I brought someone into the company. I've got a team of 14 people. I've worked with them all for over 10 years now. I've never been ghosted. I've never ghosted them. Disappear in my life.
Yeah, you have good people around you.
I've tried. Like, I've tried to get rid of another many times, but he just keeps reappearing. But I think one of the reasons why I'm perhaps a little bit quiet here is because the topic that is being discussed here I'm not sure if it's applicable generically around the globe. To me, this is very sort of applicable to a very sect of society at the moment that is very vocal on social. So you tend to hear about it that much more. Now, from my personal experience, where is my business? Where do I recruit? Um, it's not in North America. It's not in Western Europe. Most of my recruitment is actually done in the Middle
Mm-hmm.
East and in South Asia.
Mm-hmm.
The demands for work employment is very, very different
Mm-hmm.
there. And the people that I met 15 years ago, I met them in the Middle East. We were all juniors working in different environments. And when I started my first company back in 2008, I employed a whole load. And then they've stuck with me ever since. Then when I started the next agency, I shifted a whole load of team members over, and they've stuck with me. Whereas if I've had to apply for a job, it's like apply for a job and that's it, no reply. But I think that is a different issue altogether, where the volume of applicants that there are now and the way that communication is done as a result of it dictates how a response is given, which means some things have just now become the social norm, which means society has moved on, society has changed because technology has provided a wider environment. If I put a job role up today, sorry, Chris, I know you're dying to say something. Give me one thing. If I put a job role up today, I'll get 1,000 applicants within 24 hours. And it's impossible for me to reply to 1,000 applicants. It's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to speak to that, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, or Z.
Either or.
Um, so you had touched on the number of applicants, and I think to myself, I think, okay, if I am an organization and let's say I am trying to fill this one role, now when let's say I'm going to use LinkedIn or Indeed or, another type of job board. Now, would you think it would be wise to cap the number of applicants? Because I look at it in a way of like almost like doing user research, which is after a certain amount, the numbers are going to be relatively the same. And what I mean by that is, are you less likely to get a good candidate or somebody that is a great fit um, out of, I'm just going to use arbitrary numbers, out of 100 people versus 1,000.
It
Does that
depends on
make
the
sense?
role.
Okay, that's fair. Because I just think to myself, if I receive, let's say a canned response that says, due to the number of applicants, we've had to move on. Okay, that's fine. But again, out of, let's say 1,000, um, I don't know. I guess my point is, I feel that capping the applicant, at least for like a first round. And if you don't find somebody, then, kind of continue, might be for the betterment of both employer and employee.
Sure. I think that having a process and a structure in place that facilitates what you guys mentioned as good behavior, then absolutely it should be done. Um, if that number is 1,000 or 10,000 or 10, so be it. There's systems in place. There's automation everywhere, left, right, and center now. And I hate to use the word because everyone else is just throwing it around. AI can be utilized in lots of different ways from a language model perspective. And reviewing CVs, reviewing resumes to facilitate that. Now, I've got some friends who are recruiters, and they literally just do a keyword search
Yeah.
through CVs, through resumes, and be like, which one mentions this keyword the most?
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's move that forward, and that goes over, and then everyone else is like, oh, thanks very much. So, in my opinion, the process is not right. It's not fair. It's also from a psychology perspective, the interview process is fundamentally flawed,
Yeah.
and which is why the whole ghosting element that people talk about, I understand it more and more because it ties in very closely with the world of dating,
Hmm.
online dating, modern dating. That's where this sort of ghosting nonsense comes from, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys brought up a lot of really good points, and I want to turn it to Veronica. At G&A, do you guys put in your experience and the way that you sort of help other organizations create these processes and these programs for exactly these issues that we're talking about, uh, narrowed way down to the interview process and the recruiting process? What kind of insights can you share around these issues that we're talking about concerning, for example, capping the number of applicants at a certain amount that's reasonable, that makes sense per the job, potentially reopening the job after a certain amount of candidates are screened, and et cetera?
Sure. So at G&A Partners, we have a couple of different ways that we approach our clients with different recruiting strategies, and different tools, right, to use, like applicant tracking systems where they're able to uh, receive applicants' resumes, they're able to categorize them based on different um, positions. They can, you know, actually give them 5-star ratings, right? And then building this repository, because I think to both Chris and Z's point, there comes a point in time where you build your database, right? And if you're always constantly going to the market and just re-upping the same application or the same position, you're going to get basically those same type of applicants. And so in my opinion, and what a lot of our recruiting teams also do, is they help our clients build that repository so
Hmm.
that if you have the same position multiple times throughout the year that you're um, filling, then you build up that candidate pool. And a lot of people, even if they're in a position, if a better opportunity comes their way, and this is another thing that's happened, over the last 5 years, where there is no loyalty, right, to organizations like it used to be. I mean, people used to retire from a company after 25 years.
Mm.
Now you're
That's
lucky if you see a person that's at a company any longer than 2 to 3 years. So building up that repository and just building that process, right? Because it's not just about the recruiting process, it's more about how are you branding yourself? How are you differentiating
yes.
yourself from other competitors in your industry? And that is a whole other conversation topic that we could hit on, right? But it's really about positioning yourself as an employer of choice. And working with an organization like G&A Partners, we take all of that into consideration, not just, you know, what candidates are out there and what positions you're trying to fill at
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
aspect.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned branding because and communications, because to Zishan's point as well, there's 100% cultural implications underneath these behaviors and these sort of actions and reactions even. And we are absolutely focusing on the issues that are apparently more prevalent in the West, statistically speaking. I mean, even in Western Europe, there is a article that Veronica and I were passing between each other recently by a Kevin Johnson, who's the CEO of an organization in London, and he references the exact same concept, which is incredible because it's almost one to one. But he identifies it as self focus instead of this selfish care that I sort of coined. And what I'm interested in is, okay, so this issue exists, and we might even take a beat from Zishan in terms of how he handles his organization and his recruits and how he's able to manage this sort of loyalty over time. But how do we then sort of redirect inward focus in the sense that we want to realign mission and purpose with employees who are already there, putting recruits, for example, aside and trying to nurture new recruits, new employees, whether it's through onboarding or through training programs or otherwise. How do you cultivate a culture where there's transparency, there's communication, there's accountability, there's a desire to actually be part of a group? There is this, it sort of mitigates the notion that it's all about the individual. This individualism is counterintuitive and counterproductive to the sort of growth that we're envisioning as an organization, and sort of bringing back the familial values, as it were, which I believe is the case, more of the case in, say, the Middle East or the East.
That was me, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, to your first point, how do I hold on to staff members, basically? I built a process within my own company through my own personal experiences. I've been fortunate enough to work in many different countries throughout my life. I've lived in lots of different locations throughout my life, and I've tried to build what, through my personal experience, has shown what is perhaps positive, and I've tried to do away with as much of the negative elements as possible. One example is my business has been completely remote since 2008. We've not required anyone to turn up to an office since 2009, which gives people the infinite amount of freedom to do whatever they want. We also then give people unlimited annual leave, so they can take as much leave as they want throughout the year. There's no restrictions on it whatsoever. And you'll actually be surprised to find out that the average number of days that are taken by leave is 7 in a year. People can work from anywhere in the world. There is no requirement for them to be in any particular time zone at any particular time. They're given a brand new laptop and a brand new phone in January every year. They get to keep the previous one. And if they bring in any business into the organization, they get a 10% bonus of the year-long contract as cash that goes into their pocket straight away within a month as well. So that's the first piece. Now, what everyone always says to me is, "Oh, if I get a job with you tomorrow, you're going to give me all of that?" And the answer is no. That doesn't come for 6 months. So you're on a 6-month probation where you're required to fulfill certain expectations to show whether or not you turn up. Am I going to get ghosted? That you turn up, you arrive at meetings, you're polite, you're courteous, you hit your deadlines, you submit your reports, your clients don't complain. So we have a zero tolerance on client complaints. If we get one complaint from a client about you're late, you didn't do the work, or the quality is not good enough. Now, if you didn't understand, that's one thing. But if it's because you're bone idle, you're lazy, you didn't turn up, you lose all of your privilege and your 6 months starts again.
Oh, okay.
And that's for people, if you've been in the company for 5 years or for 10 years, it doesn't matter. It's the same rule for me as well. It applies to everything that I do, all the way through to someone who started tomorrow. It doesn't matter. In addition to that, if you do bring in a client and you are working on a particular project, you are on that one project. I'm not going to take you off it, because the rapport you build with your client, with your team, is what brings people together. And these are the things that were important to me. And I realized very quickly that the absence of these things is what is lacking. So being a business student a long time ago, having studied international business and marketing, um, people management and motivational theories were very, very strong in what I studied. Um, and I'm a real advocate of Frederick Hertzberg's theory X, theory Y, where you've got hygiene factors and motivational factors. And based on that theory is what I've tried to do my best to structure the organization around that, in terms of what is it that that keeps people in the business versus what keeps people performing very well in the business. And they're two very
Yeah,
different
right,
things. And ironically, money is not a motivator.
right.
Money is actually a huge hygiene factor because of the way people view money and the emotional reaction that you have to money. So if I suddenly employ another tomorrow and I pay him $500, he's going to fill his life to spend $500. And he'll come to me and be like, hey, I need some more money. It's not going to motivate him to do any more work if I give him $1,000, but he'll take it. But he'll stay in the business because he's like, okay, £1,000, $1,000, I'll take it. Sorry, I'll say pounds because
Yeah,
I'm in the UK. And then he gets $1,000, and then he'll fill up his life to spend $1,000, and then the cycle continues.
yeah, yeah. It's a hundred
So
percent in.
there's an education.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just saying there's an education piece around that as well. So that's something that I provide within the business. So I have another business, a financial education business here in the UK. I also have a fintech business in Cyprus, and they provide financial education and knowledge to people to better improve their financial knowledge and how they live within their financial structure. So we do try to support people within their life as opposed to just within their job.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we have massive loyalty. In 14 years of doing this, I've lost one member of staff.
Congrats, man. That's
And
amazing. Good for you.
thank you.
Yeah.
In the agency world, most people stay between 3 and 9 months. It's literally a
Mm-hmm.
revolving door. Um, so there's huge appreciation of the team because it's like we've worked together for such a long time. But at the same time, the structure that they get and the amount of money that they can make is literally based on how well they perform.
You bring up a great point, and earlier when we first started our conversation, I introduced the impact of leadership in the engagement and satisfaction in an employee's performance. And going back to what Nader was talking about, the self focus, um, you know leaders need to develop that culture where everyone matters, right? Because we all want to be of something bigger than ourselves. But if the environment um, it doesn't lend itself to that, then as individuals, we want to do our own thing, right? We want to show like, oh, I can do this. Like, I'm really great at this. Like, I don't need collaboration. I don't need a team. But the leadership really plays a pivotal role in shaping that company's culture. um, Fostering trust and having an environment where there's empathy, where there's compassion, creating a space where employees grow, because everyone, humans want to grow in their positions and in their professions. And, I think that there's the term manager and then there's leadership, and they're not the same at all. I mean, leaders, they act as a leader, but they need to think as a leader first. And when I have worked under great leadership, I will do anything and everything to give that extra discretionary effort, and it not be just about myself, but be the better for the team, the better for the organization. So it seems, Z, that you've created that in your company where everyone has their role, they know what it is, and it's communicated. Communication is so big in creating a culture that fosters productivity and morale, positive morale and engagement.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's very cool, Zishan. It's the the ideal employee profile, right? As opposed to the ideal client profile. You create this very specific sort of vision that you have for people to come on board to your team, and you give them a reason to care to be there. They know their part in the chain, as it were, to the point where you assign you assign any onboarding that they are responsible for to to that individual. They lead that project, which I think is awesome. So you already are leaning into this intrinsic motivation of buy-in, and I agree with you. Money motivators only last so long. It doesn't matter how many times you get a raise if the situation, the environment, your input, and how you're treated, or how there might be a lack of collaboration or whatever, is still there. It doesn't matter how much money you get paid. You get paid your high for about 3 months, and then you're like, wait, I'm still here, and nothing has changed. It's exactly the same. I mean, I'm just as miserable as I was 3 months ago, because I don't actually have more free time to spend the money that I'm making now. So it sort of all ties in together, and I really agree with that approach. So um in so how do we implement, in a company that, say, doesn't have a program that's strong like that, that's really sort of grounded in that sort of a culture that seems to be working. And we can even go bigger here for companies that are, I mean, not even that big, but 100 to 200 employees. In your opinions or experiences, what kind of stories might you have, or even proposals, recommendations on how to relink, or even link, if they weren't broken to begin with, just never existed, employees to a collective mission and vision? How do you get that buy-in from both new employees or employees who are already there but feel jaded and sort of bored and disconnected with the entire purpose of an organization?
Feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to them. Have a conversation. Understand who they are. Empower the middle management to have it as part of their requirement. Because if you don't know what the problems are, if they're disgruntled, if they're unmotivated, if they're having a problem, unless you know what the issue is, you can't solve it. You might find it's
Why?
not even a work related issue, it
Yeah.
might actually be something outside of work completely.
Yeah.
So it's exceptionally difficult to identify if you don't speak to people.
Yep. Yeah. The word feedback resonates so deeply with me. Uh, I have this conversation with all of you, actually. It's the lack of feedback can make you feel crazy, when you're doing something over and over again, and you don't know, whether what you're doing works, it doesn't work, if it's correct, if it's incorrect. You just have no reflection back to you. Uh,
I'm speaking into the
yeah,
void.
speaking into a void, and to the point of employees, people looking for jobs, job seekers. I myself went through this a few years ago. I applied to something like 260 jobs in 6 months or something, and I got it was when we were not doing so hot, and I was just looking for work. And I think I got one interview and maybe 10 responses out of all that, and I was just going kind of nuts, wondering, am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong? I even spoke with recruiters who were telling me that my application and my resume looks fine, and I'm going, how is that possible? I'm not getting any sort of reactions. So feedback is huge. It's absolutely essential. I agree completely. And talking to people, it seems so simple, but it's so rarely done, man. It's it's so interesting.
And outside of work, though, like
Mhm.
I could speak to so many people, and it's like relationships at all level are all based on very, very, very few fundamental things. Having the ability to communicate is one of the main ones. And the irony is, our education systems don't teach you how to communicate. They teach you how to write an essay in Pythagoras' theorem, which I've never used since I was about this big. But there was an exam on it. Like,
Right.
but what it didn't show me was, how do I write a presentation to go get funding from a VC?
Right.
or how do I write an email to another so that he's happy with me and gives me lots of money and he stays with me as a client. Like the how do you communicate at the end of the day is what comes into it. And we can throw words around like, active listening. Okay, fine. What the hell is active listening? I guarantee you, most people can't explain what I can't say what active listening is, and I'm a qualified coach. Um,
Yeah.
so
Um,
we've got all these problems everywhere, which facilitate the problems that sit there at a higher level.
mhm.
Um, and like people who become a leader or a manager doesn't mean that they're a good manager or a good leader. It's because they've done well at, I don't know, exec level. They're good at doing something and they've now become a manager because they've got nowhere else to go within the business. And
Yeah.
now they're responsible for people. And a really good example of this is in the IT world. You can be a techie, a geek, you can be a great programmer, but you might be such a big introvert, you hate speaking to people.
Yep.
And now you're responsible for a team of 50 people. How are you going to do that?
Yeah. I know I've experienced that. We so bringing it back to communications and branding in this capacity and how to sort of create buy-in from the get-go. In our own model, we in the interview process, in the first interview, we talk about just the applicant's future desired state, the same way that we would talk to a client. We ask them about not, where do you see yourself in 3 years, but it's 3 years from now, and we're really happy with the progress we've made and how you've been involved in our own company vision and our future vision and so on. What's happened in the last 3 years to make you so happy? And if they can, and that puts them in a future position where they're already envisioning themselves in that place. So they think backwards and go backwards from there as to, okay, what were the things that happened from this moment in time, from this interview until that moment? What happened in those 3 years? And so with that conversation framed in that way, you can already start talking about milestones within the first interview, the first interaction ever. And you can create this vision of a growth path for the applicant from the get-go and speak about their growth path and their journey within this company in a way that's aligned with the company vision and the brand values, asking questions like what you just said, Z, about I ask questions, what do you value most in a relationship? I don't care about like work or jobs or whatever. In your relationships, what do you value most? And what is the most important thing to you? What will prompt you to say, I don't want to be friends with this person anymore. I can't be in this relationship. That's all. What has to happen for that to happen? And because that's how we run our business. We run our business based on certain values. And those values are based on what we prefer in a relationship. And that comes specifically from me at Black Rivet. It's reliability. Reliability is our number one value above all else. And I've actually been asked, what do you mean by reliability? And I say, you do the thing you say you're going to do. That's all that means. So if you say you're going to do this by such and such time, you do it by such and such time. If you say okay, that means you acknowledge what we talked about and now something's going to happen. So it's interesting. I think there is a model where you can get at the bottom, you can get at the bottom of these issues very quickly and very early on and get intrinsic buy-in from the get-go to the point where you don't necessarily need to run an applicant through 5 interviews or 5 different people or 5 different meetings. I think you can do it in 2. I think you can, in some situations, do it in 1, depending on obviously the job, but certain technical roles I think require perhaps a little bit more testing, for example. But what's up, Zeke?
Our interview process is long.
It is. How long is your interview process? I'm curious about that.
So it's like face-to-face meetings or online meetings. We do 3. They then have 2 presentations at 2 different levels.
Okay. And how
So it's
long
fun.
does it take in terms of time?
It can take up to 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Okay, that's not so bad though. 3 weeks is not so bad. I've spoken to people and I've been in roles myself where it takes over 6 weeks, and it's just
Yeah,
insane.
when
I
I
mean,
when I interviewed at Microsoft, it was 7 stages, and it took 3 months.
yeah, it's just crazy. At that point, if you have top talent, man, this is another thing. Like top talent will just. Chris and I were talking about this recently. If you have top talent, um, they have other offers. I mean, they're just going to bounce. And if you, as the
Of
employer
course.
or the leader, don't recognize that right off the bat, I mean, what are you doing? You're just losing out on good talent, and then you're hiring based on arbitrary reasons instead of like a real gut feeling about somebody. Uh,
I mean, there's a leaf to be taken out of the medical profession here in the UK. So the UK National Health Service is struggling immensely, and dentists are in a horrible state at the moment. They have a one-stage interview at the moment because there are such a shortage of dentists in the UK. That's one,
mhm.
and then the other one is good dentists are even fewer in between. So when they go in for an interview, if they don't get an offer there and then on the spot, they'll get hired at the next interview. That's it. There's no recourse. Like if they walk out the door, you've lost them, and that's on the
Right.
practice side of responsibility, not on the candidate, because the candidate knows, hey, I'm actually quite good. I've got an interview. That means I'm going to get the job 99%.
Yeah. Um, so we've learned that in order to sort of mitigate this culture of selfish care in the workplace from both sides, whether it's from the employer or the employee side, there there really needs to be these programs and initiatives put into place that align the values of both sides. One, create intrinsic motivation, well, for both sides, but specifically for the employee. Give the employee or the recruit a reason to care. It starts with leadership, right? As we learn, and therefore, as a result of that motivating leadership, I mean, we can only hope, but we believe strategically that it will actually encourage applicants and potential employees to also care as much as the employer, meaning like we both need each other. We need you as much as you need us, and you need us as much as we need you. And that is needs to be clear from the get-go, to the point where I think expectations are huge. Setting expectations on both sides is also a winner. To Chris's point in the very beginning, and in my point about reliability, if you're going to tell somebody that you will get back to them in a certain amount of time, you don't need it. It doesn't need to get to a point where someone's not following up with you, making themselves look desperate after you didn't follow up on your own words. So I think there's a lot to be taken from the various stories and experiences that we've heard here. There's a lot of work to be done. I know that for sure, especially in the West, and I do believe there is a cultural implication that's sort of beneath these events.